I have to unmute myself first. Hello, everyone. My name is Vincent. I'm the membership chair for the Canadian Club of Calgary. So, as you notice, we are on the Zoom platform. So please feel free to engage in the chat box that's attached, and feel free to submit questions and answers as we go through our presentation with Heather. So, without further ado, let me add Sally and Susan to be a panelist, and they will do the land acknowledgement and introduction.
Oh, good morning, everybody. I'd like to begin today's Canadian Club luncheon presentation by paying respect to the First Nations, people on whose ancestral land we gather. We are gratefully acknowledge their vibrant language, history, and culture that enrich our community today. Today, I'd love to thank everybody from our Canadian Club membership for Zooming in today, as you have very loyally the last several months. And today I've heard that we have over 100 people coming in to listen. So we're going to have a wonderful presentation today, and thank you for joining us. Heather Campbell has had a diverse 25-year career in energy, policy, and business. She holds a Bachelor of Engineering degree from Western University and a Master of Laws in Energy from Dundee, Scotland. Presently, she's Executive Director at Clean Energy. Equally important to her full-time working career, Ms. Campbell is an engaged, lifelong community volunteer. She shares her talents, resources, and time by participating in a diverse range of organizations. She is on the board of the Calgary Performing Arts Centre, Arts Commons. She is a member of the Advisory Council for Western Engineering. She is a People's Warden at St. Stephen's Anglican Church and a commissioner with the Calgary Police Commission. She's also the co-chair or former co-chair of Alberta's Anti-Racism Advisory Council. We're very pleased to have such an important presentation today entitled, Are We Really in This Together? Please welcome Ms. Campbell.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Sally, for that lovely introduction. Vincent, we'll just do a quick slide share here. And great. Good morning. My name is Heather Campbell, and I'm honored to be your guest speaker today. I'm joining you today from my home in Calgary, where I live as a guest on the traditional territories of Treaty 7 nations in southern Alberta and the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. As it says on the Canadian Club of Calgary's website, all Canadian clubs in Canada are not-for-profit, nonpartisan organizations dedicated to promoting a Canadian identity, encouraging Canadian unity, and fostering an interest in public affairs and Canadian institutions. I'm just going to get rid of me. We want to make a difference and to encourage those who are making a difference in our society. Today, we'll explore what Canadian unity means in a racialized context. Today, we'll challenge the oft-stated line that goes, "We're all in this together." I don't mince words. I can't talk about racism without saying racism. So you're going to hear that a lot. And when we get into the section on justice, I have some material in this presentation that may be triggering for some. So I just need to responsibly make sure you're aware up front. Remember this? When I asked my local Calgary Centre MP about this particular statement and this question, he jostled and he joked, and he said it was just a slogan. I pressed him further for context, and he never responded. Slogans like this one from the Conservative Party of Canada's leader and the leader of the official opposition are statements of disunity. This slogan clearly provides for us and them. It is the definition of creating the other. We talk a good game of the concept that together we're stronger, but in this case, you'd actually think, oh my goodness, is Canada being held against its will? But where are you really from? It's by far my favorite microaggression. If I'm in a cheeky mood, my answer is invariably from my mother's womb with the assistance of St. Mary's Hospital, Montreal. When the questioner comes to realize that I'm Canadian, their face often reveals significant disappointment. The questioner, I believe, was trying to place me as an outsider, somehow attempting to demonstrate my unbelonging. In the wake of this particular question, galling and offensive as I find it, I'm often left feeling defeated because I now have to quite unfairly give an account of my Canadian credentials. The question, naively curious, but horribly offensive, is a deliberate mechanism to make me feel the other. I always wonder what causes people to ask this question. What about me says, not Canadian? Is it my gender? Is it my command of both official languages? I'm clearly being facetious here. I know what it is. It's that I'm a Black woman. So what does this person, the questioner, gain by making me the other? The myth that racism only happens to immigrants is an othering. We know this is a myth because we know the extreme amounts of systemic racism that's experienced by those in Indigenous communities, the original peoples of this land. The racial disparities are real, persistent, and present right here in Calgary. Black women and men in Calgary and Edmonton are between 1.5 to 2 times more likely to be unemployed than the rest of the population. Unemployment rates are higher among Indigenous individuals in every Canadian province and territory compared to the rest of the population. Even when Indigenous and non-Indigenous groups have the same level of education, they don't experience the same employment rate success. And finally, Black men and women living in Alberta's biggest cities make significantly less money than their non-Black counterparts. Statistics Canada data from 2016 shows an average wage gap in Calgary's population of approximately $35,000. Quite bluntly, Black women in Calgary earn approximately 49%, just less than half of what the non-Black male population earns in Calgary. Is this measurable inequity demonstration of Canadian unity? Naturally, there's a fear of change management. Everyone knows that having diverse voices at the table is the right and profitable thing to do. But they worry, does that diminish my power, silence my voice, make me non-essential? Having a seat at the table doesn't mean a loss of power for traditional colonial style leadership. Every board table, and I'm quite certain every board table in this city is big enough to accommodate diverse voices. It's no longer an economic conversation. This is about our values and our ethics. Who and what do you value? When people say, I don't see color, it isn't necessarily received by a Black woman like me with the warm, loving embrace you would think a statement like that might receive. Rather, it's actually a source of frustration and a microscopic but invasive, aggressive act of racism. When someone tells me I don't see color, to me, that means you don't see me. You don't see me or my unique needs in life. It means you see me as normal and define normal as white, and white male most often. And when that thinking, where I'm invisible and erased from the scope of society, becomes prevalent, it erodes the quality of life for racialized people like me. Every woman on this Zoom call will understand how this particular microaggression manifests itself in healthcare. For decades, women were never researched or studied. Women's health needs were essentially ignored, save for childbirth. In 2021, we have limited and in certain cases, no research at all on Black women and their health. Between 2013 and 2017, the death rate from breast cancer was 40% higher in Black women than in white women, despite a slightly smaller incidence of breast cancer in Black women. 40%. And no one can explain why this is so in a Canadian context. What often happens when I share that particular statistic is that the audience recoils and they're shocked, but shortly after they go on with their lives as though I've said absolutely nothing at all. How is this the reality for my life, where no one cares that I have a 40% higher risk from death from breast cancer than my white peers? The data is available, but no one seems to have an obligation to do any research to preserve my health. Is my life not valued? Okay, we know the Police Act doesn't work effectively in a 2021 context. We know the historic nature of policing in this country is deeply rooted in racism. Cultural historian Dr. Ainsley Hawthorne has documented that policing in North America has, from its creation, been deeply rooted in racism. Understanding the history of the Northwest Mounted Police, a predecessor to the RCMP, the Northwest Mounted Police role in the colonization and white settlement of Western Canada, the resulting difficult and damaged relationship with Indigenous people, and the existence and use of slave patrols in North American policing, we can authentically appreciate the weight of our shared history and scope and the opportunity to reform and refresh our approach to justice and policing with respect to Black and Indigenous peoples in Canada. The Police Act in Alberta is currently under review, and as a commissioner with the Calgary Police Commission, providing governance and oversight as established in the Police Act, I'm anxious to support the codification of the Commission's and Calgary Police Service's joint modernization efforts like anti-racism and explicit bias training for all police officers, acknowledgement of this history of systemic racism in policing and the need for a new relationship with racialized people, and other justice system reforms and policy innovations that would restore trust and improve the relationship between peace and police, and racialized people. Systemic racism exists in policing as it does throughout society. The city, CPS, and the Commission are partnered on the next steps of the Anti-Racism Action Plan. The statement and acknowledgement of systemic racism by Calgary Police last fall was historic. Let me say that again. We had a statement and acknowledgement of systemic racism by Calgary Police Service that was made by Chief Mark Neufeld, and that was historic. CPS is working on an alternative service delivery mode that will better support the community. This is innovative work, and Calgary has the opportunity to be a real leader in this area. By working on an alternative service delivery mode, Calgary is at the forefront of testing new approaches to reducing our reliance on traditional law enforcement and medical 911 responses and creating more equitable outcomes for communities of color and others that are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system. This is a photograph of former police officer Derek Chauvin being taken away after being found guilty of murder in the death of George Floyd, a Minneapolis, Minnesota resident. This Chauvin verdict was historic. Look hard at this photo. It isn't actually justice. It doesn't heal the wounds. It's one man who murdered another man. What about the countless others? If we're not transforming the entire system to provide accountability in the face of use of force, we don't have justice. Justice isn't only policing, it's courts, it's corrections, it's the legislation itself. One of the most challenging things in my life right now is reading the 1,109-page report called Missing and Missed. This review was largely prompted by concerns that in the MacArthur-related investigations in Toronto and Peel regions were damaged by systemic bias. Many community members felt that the Toronto Police remained uninterested in the disappearances of MacArthur's victims until Mr. Andrew Kinsman, who was not a person of color, was reported missing. The full review of these cases takes into account the presence and impact of systemic bias, discrimination, and differential treatment by Toronto Police, and in the investigation of missing persons and their cases. How are we really talking about secularism laws? The secularism laws in Quebec are about preventing Muslim women who wear the hijab from working in the public sector. Full stop. It's ridiculous and Islamophobic, and we should fight it on every front. We still have leaders in Quebec openly denying the existence of systemic racism. This is happening today while the nurses charged in the death of Joyce Echaquan are sitting on the stand today. Officially, the secularism laws are called an act respecting the laicity of the state. And the preamble of the legislation reads like this: as it is important that the paramountcy of the state laicity be enshrined in Quebec's legal order, as the Quebec nation attaches importance to the equality of women and men, as a stricter duty of restraint regarding religious matters should be established for persons exercising certain functions, resulting in their being prohibited from wearing religious symbols in the exercise of their functions, blah, blah, blah. Calgary City Council's unanimous vote to oppose Quebec's secularism law, Bill 21, and defend Calgarians' right to wear religious symbols and articles of faith under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in September 2019 was a historic moment of brave, resolute leadership by Calgary City Council. Bravo. Others should stand beside Calgary in voice and stamina. Racism is about you over me. It's about denying people the opportunity to thrive and prosper. It's about denying a person their human dignity. Racism isn't a partisan issue. Don't look away when the topic of racism comes up. Don't deny the existence of systemic racism. Don't pacify the outrage, hoping the topic will die down or fade away. Racism directly erodes the health, prosperity, and well-being of people. Avoiding naming racism when it occurs and silencing the voices who call out racism, those aren't helpful behaviors either. They're actually behaviors which reflect the mechanisms by which a society avoids dealing with racism altogether. With racism, silence is merely an act of complicity. So I've said the words racism a lot. And you know what? It's not like folks haven't been trying really hard to fix a few things. Alberta's Anti-Racism Advisory Council, their story should equally be told. Using their opportunity to run the baton forward on anti-racism in Alberta, the council developed thoughtful, tangible, transformative recommendations to address systemic racism. The council shared their wisdom, passion, and leadership with the goal of helping Alberta and her people grow, prosper, and thrive. The recommendations, having been delivered to the province in January of this year, sit waiting for the government to assume their accountability to consider the report, share the recommendations publicly, and make sincere, focused efforts to eliminate systemic racism. In our ever-evolving relationship with Indigenous people in Canada, we must responsibly own our history, acknowledge the harms that have been perpetrated, and go forward in a renewed spirit of care, reconciliation, applying anti-racism principles, and particularly as it relates to racialized and Indigenous people. We have a moral obligation to see through and deliver on the 94 calls to action published by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This moral obligation should be front of mind for Calgarians in consideration of the residential schools that existed in and were operated historically by Calgary churches. This moral obligation, in my mind, far exceeds any obligations that are perceived to be waived in the presence of financial and legal agreements, like the settlement agreement to which the Anglican Church, in which I am a leader, is a party. If you've read the White Goose Flying report, you know that it's named for Jack White Goose Flying. In 1899, a 17-year-old young man, whom we now know to be Jack White Goose Flying, of the Piikani Nation in Brockett, Alberta, Treaty 7 territory, died of tuberculosis at Calgary's only residential school, St. Dunstan's Anglican School. He was buried on a hill above the school overlooking the Bow River, south of what's now known as the present-day Bonnybrook wastewater treatment plant, just over here in Ogden. His grave was piled with stones and surrounded by a white picket fence. His grave remained there, actually outlasting the school at which he'd been a resident. So here we are. It's May 2021. And in May 2020, or June perhaps even, your company probably did a blackout statement. I can ask you to think, consider, recall that. And then the burning question, what have you done since? So no, we're not really in this together, but we can work to change that as Canadians. The unity question today is a different question entirely than what we were thinking about in 1995. So let's talk about what a go-forward plan for bolstering Canadian unity looks like. We need to own it. Ask yourself what role you have consciously or unconsciously played in the marginalization of racialized and Indigenous people in Canada. We need to denounce it. Racism is not a partisan issue. Call it out each and every time it occurs. That's the daily work of being anti-racist. Destabilize. Systemic racism is inherent in our institutions. Be courageous and actively work to destabilize the institutions and the systemic racism that resides within and erodes the capacity for people to thrive and prosper. And last but not least, unify. In your anti-racism work, engage members from racialized and Indigenous communities, following the principle of nothing about us without us. Include a broad range of people, true allies in your anti-racism work in the strategy development. In closing, I'm leaving you with a quote from actor Daniel Kaluuya. While he shamed his poor mother when he won his Academy Award with some other comments about his parents, he did say something profound in the moment. When they played Divide and Conquer, we say unite and ascend. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. So give me one moment as I load up a thank you video from one of our board members, Deborah Mabude. So give me one moment as I load this up.
We just wanted to say a very special final thank you to Heather Campbell for joining us this afternoon. We are so grateful for your contributions to our community, to the conversation today, and the work that you've been doing for so long. We're especially grateful for the diversity lens that you continue to bring to so much of your work, for your contributions to the Alberta Anti-Racism Advisory Council, as well as Arts Commons Board of Directors. We know that this community would not be the same without you, and so we're grateful for your time today. We hope that you would join us again and continue to be part of our conversations at the Canadian Club of Calgary.
So as a bit of housekeeping before we get to the Q&A, our next event is going to be with Dr. Rob Hubert, and we're going to be discussing the topic of militarization of the Arctic, which is a fascinating topic, particularly with a little bit of climate change and a lot of activity happening up north. So, but let's get to the Q&A. There's been some questions filtering in. I see Marianne Shenlick has been sharing a lot of commentary there, along with David Morales. And then we have some other commentary coming through the chat. But as folks add in their questions and queries, we have some pre-prepared ones. And one element that's interspliced throughout your presentation, Heather, is the core concept of unembedding systemic racism and integrating the concept of anti-racism in our activities, our structures, our institutions. One part is symbolism, which you highlighted with the blackout social media posts that various companies, institutions did. What would be the next step? How would one begin the process of this society-wide effort?
I'll talk from a corporate perspective first, and then I'll think about, I would say, some of the not-for-profit organizations in which I participate. So when I think about some of the corporate organizations, my message is always, don't do business with racists. And that sounds really trite and a bit brusque, but it's actually quite thoughtful when you think about it. So let's think about it this way. Back in the before times when we could travel, everyone had a corporate travel policy, and you have certain hotels you got to stay at and certain car rental companies you have to use, yada yada. So off I go to the hotel, and I have a business meeting out of town, and I rock up to the hotel and I'm treated poorly, and I know because of the manner in which I treated that they're being racist. What do? Because I have to stay there or I won't be reimbursed by my company for my travel, because that's the plan. But I'm treated horribly while I'm there. So ideally, what would actually happen is I would return from my nice little business trip and I would report in to my corporate travel policy coordinator or procurement team or whoever handles that in my company. And I would say, yeah, you know what? Hotel XYZ, not cool. Bunch of racists. We need to not do business with them. They would believe me and say, okay, Heather, thank you very much. We'll seek about undoing that contract. They would not do business with that company in the future. We would not be forced to actually stay there. And then the last part, and probably the most important part, they then tell the world. They say, yeah, us, company ABC, we're no longer doing business with hotel chain XYZ because they're racist and they treat our employees badly. When I think about it from a not-for-profit perspective, it's about leadership. And each of the organizations in which I participate, whether it's a board member, we are all having this conversation. At Arts Commons, that conversation is being led by the talented CEO, Alex Sarian. We are putting an anti-racism lens on our entire approach for Arts Commons, whether it be the leadership, the performances that we bring in through Arts Commons Presents, the resident companies within our fold, our access to our facilities. It's a look at the entire organization and our programming and our functioning. It's about applying that lens to your thinking in every day, all the time. So there's an example for that piece. I'll stop now.
So this sounds like a fairly uncomfortable experience, not only from the receipt of behavior, but also for the racialized individual. My apologies for my neighbors there. But one element is that taking the moment to analyze the institution, your own engagement with it. How does one? Do you have any advice for those who are wrestling with that feeling of discomfort on the topic of racism? Because a lot of our members want to do right, they want to do good, but how does one actually, begin that personal journey?
That's a challenging question for me to answer, Vincent, only because I don't know what it's like not to be Black. I don't know what it's like not to be a Black woman. That is my journey every day. What I do know is that I approach it with an open heart. I approach people with an open mind. And I don't naturally assume that someone is out to do me harm. There's always an element of kindness and openness, and this idea where, as much as I challenged it, that we are truly stronger together. So I would say I preface it by that. I encourage folks to be courageous. It is okay to not know. I am developing my knowledge of Indigenous communities, practices, and history as an adult, having been educated in Canada my entire life, with the exception of my master's degree. I went to school where the names of the schools had Indigenous people's names on them, but that was the extent of my Indigenous education. And so it's a personal accountability, and I think my personal responsibility to learn more and to right the wrong that was provided to me in my youth. So that's a difficult question to answer, but I'll give you that piece.
Yeah. So let's turn to some of the questions that were put in through the Q&A. Marianne submitted about 8 or 9 different comments. But within one comment was a bit of a question. And okay. I'm going to restate it in that she highlights her frustration with the RCMP and specifically calls for its disbandment. So nestled within that, I think, is she's wrestling with the concept of abolishment of certain police services. So with the question and the bit of the online meme that was abolishing the police, what are your thoughts about that discussion?
Wow. So the conversation on defund the police it hasn't become politicized. It was politicized from the moment at which it was opened. Their Calgary Police Service, I certainly can't speak to the RCMP. I can only speak to what I understand with respect to Calgary Police Commission and the Calgary Police Service. And jointly, we are actively looking at alternative service delivery models where you would have a coordinated response and respect the idea that for a number of police organizations, and particularly has been articulated by Calgary Police Service, the police are not necessarily trained to respond to the social and health crises that are occurring within our community. And a more coordinated and partnered relationship with healthcare providers and social services and mental health and addictions, and also having a lens and a perspective on anti-racism over top of that collection of responders and responsiveness would be helpful to generate better outcomes for people who have historically been underserved and felt at harm because of the manner in which they've been policed. So for me, in my day job, I work for Alberta Innovates. I like to think that an approach to an innovative, creative research solution might be a different opportunity.
So, changing streams on you for a moment, one aspect of anti-racism is also about the promotion and celebration of our community members. And Deborah Mahmoud, the young woman who thanked you, actually, she won an award the other month with the Calgary Black Chambers, their youth award, which is pretty great. But I hear you're quite familiar with the organization. So can you tell us about this new institution that's come into form here in Calgary?
Absolutely, Vincent. I am a member of Calgary Black Chambers, and I'm grateful for the organization and their leadership. I will take every moment to celebrate the work of John Cornish, a noted former Calgary Stampeder, who leads the Calgary Black Chambers here in Calgary. So Calgary Black Chambers is founded on 4 principles: fellowship, mentorship, scholarship, and advocacy. So in the fellowship perspective, it's a safe space for Black professionals and students to share their opinions and thoughts in what can be a challenging environment, or has been a challenging environment. In the mentorship, it's about elevating our students and building confidence in students and young professionals through experience, knowledge, and guidance. We've developed over the year, an extremely successful mentorship program, and had several hundred students actually go through the mentoring program from some Calgary high schools. In last but not least, advocacy, but scholarship. And so this is helping our best achieve more and elevating Black students through education and recognition and financial support. and aiding those who will change the future. The scholarship program currently is targeted to be as large as $50,000, and we've raised about $35,000 of that already. You can support the scholarship fund, which is hosted by the Calgary Foundation. You can directly donate. Your charitable donation would help help students pay for their education and join the ranks of professionals in Calgary. If you wish to donate, I'm shamelessly promoted. I sit on the scholarship committee, so I will shamelessly promote this. If you wish to donate, it's calgaryblackchambers.ca/donate/. And if your company happens to do their corporate donations through Benevity, I know for certain that Calgary Black Chambers is already linked in there, and you can select Calgary Black Chambers as a charity and a donation vehicle.
We love it when our speakers self-promote. One, it shows a pride in the work that they do, and it's one of those great community connectors. So one element in it is from Bob Aska. He writes, Canadians tend to think of themselves as superior to their American cousins in terms of racism. What are your thoughts on, quote, relative, unquote, racism?
That's always dangerous when we start to think ourselves better than others. I think the challenge with Canada is that we have embedded our bias and our discrimination in so many places across our function and our being. The example I use, and I use this in another chat with the University of Calgary, and people were concerned that I might be trying to cancel Christmas. I'm not, so I'm going to put that disclaimer out there first. But let me walk through the thinking, and I'm going to pick on Saskatchewan. So one of the pieces of legislation that we have is the Saskatchewan Forestry Management Act. Okay. In that particular piece of legislation, somewhere about halfway down, there is a place that says you can go and cut down a tree for Christmas. That tree can be no taller than 4 meters. Why someone needs a 13-foot Christmas tree is beyond me, but I digress. No other religious use is provided. No other traditional use is provided. Just Christmas. We have embedded our discrimination and our bias into the laws that run our country at every level. So it's when we talk about it being subtle or being different, it's pervasive, and that's probably why it seems to be I would say less visible. It's because it's in everything in which we function.
So we're turning back to an earlier question from Marianne. She wanted, here we go. You did mention some of your work with being a police commissioner, but specifically, what changes have you seen at Calgary Police Services?
Well, I can speak to the changes I can see with the Calgary Police Commission. I think there's an opportunity to leverage even the diversity and the plurality of the commission itself. So it's probably not well known, so I'll say it. 8 of the 12 commissioners are women. We don't talk a lot about women in this province, but at Calgary Police Commission, 8 of the 12 commissioners who are providing that civilian oversight are women. 5 of those 12 are people of color or Indigenous members. that plurality and that difference in perspective and those demographics lend to different decision making, to different questions, and I can say that it allows us to ask different questions of the Calgary Police Service in our oversight role because of simply who we are. One of the things that I had in the presentation was the missing and missed report. So it makes you start to think about, well, what are the elements of a missing person's report, tragically, if you would ever have to make one. It makes I start to think about things like, if the person who's being reported missing is transgender, are they often misgendered if they're being reported as missing? They're often marginalized in a variety of ways. Does that impact how we're thinking through things? So it just, for me, I read something and I just have naturally different questions because of who I am.
So we have one question that came out from the chat. Another question about the United States. Dean Clark writes this question: what are your thoughts regarding critical race theory being promulgated in the US right now? I have no idea what critical race theory.
That's a bit spiky. Skip that.
Skip that one? Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, no, we're not. We're not having that conversation in polite company. No, thank you.
I assume it's something to do with watching a little bit too much Fox News. Let's see. Marianne writes, Heather, I hear you saying that people have difficulty talking about racism, which would create visibility. Thank you, Vincent. Thank you to Heather. I did not know that, and it gives me hope. And hopefully the differences will make their way into the missing and missed women's work. We have one question from a former board member, Suzanne de Corval-Nicole. What about lingualism? French is the first European language spoken in Northwest Territories today, yet French-speaking Albertans still have to fight for the rights to French language post-secondary education. Canada's official bilingualism was meant to protect minority language French in Canada and English in Quebec. French is always challenged, stifled, and denigrated. When will it stop, and what are you willing to do about it? Suzanne, I apologize, but Heather might not have as much she's amazing. I'm not sure she can win the battle of bilingualism.
Well, so that's a really important question, because for me, it speaks to having services and in a language in which you're familiar. If you're in crisis, whether it be in healthcare, in a situation of justice, at work, you want to be able to communicate in the language which you first spoke. So it makes me think about when, back to the missing persons bit, right? If you're coming to report a crime, have we made our reporting systems and our structures for doing so completely accessible to all Canadians, all Albertans, all Calgarians? So for me, it's not necessarily a question of bilingualism, but it's a question of accessibility and welcome and belonging.
So, as more folks enter in questions into the Q&A tool, One thing I've noticed, both from your introduction, the thank you, and trying to read your long bio, is that you're involved all over the place. So I assume that also leads to you being highly visible and folks trying to recruit you for this board, the other board, the other, that board too. And you know what, you should be involved there too. And hey, can you help us with, our diversity committee on X, Y, and Z? Um, Obviously, you are just one person.
Yes.
How, if someone is looking, say, to put a panel together, or to work on their governance, or to improve their diversity work, or just trying to pull folks in to help their organization slash institution slash level of government, what advice do you have on making that step of inclusion?
Wow. So I think I'll actually use advice that my good friend Todd Hirsch uses. So he's another one, as Alberta's chief economist, who gets asked to be on every panel and speaking engagement. And he will openly say no to any more manels. So the manel, in his mind, should die a tragic death. And he asks who else will be speaking with him, and he does a quick evaluation, and he'll make recommendations for who should replace. So I would say, when you're talking about all those various, conversations, make sure you have people who are relative to the conversation in the conversation. Have a list of those in your back pocket. And there's more than just me. And there are lots of organizations who can provide you with specialists and experts, even particularly for journalists. The journalists have a body that literally will provide you with experts based on gender, and all of the plurality demographics, so that you don't have to just have quotes from men in your communications. So it probably just takes a few more minutes to think.
So taking the extra step and knowing they're available. I adore the word mantle. I'm adding that to the lexicon. I'm going to start throwing that at people. I'm going to have no shame on that.
It's a good Hirsch word.
A Hirschism.
It's a Hirschism.
So Dale just sent in a question, sort of building on that media commentary. Dale asks, what improvements does Calgary mainstream media have to make for more inclusion?
That's a very challenging question. I'm certainly not an expert with respect to Calgary mainstream media, but I think the answer is always more. So more inclusion, more stories, more perspective, broader range. So if it's applying that anti-racism lens and asking yourself, okay, who's missing from this conversation? What haven't we considered in the telling of this story? I will absolutely big up one particular journalist, Carrie Tate from the Globe and Mail, because I know she actively kept track over, I'm going to say, a year, and I don't have the particular data and details in a spreadsheet or anything, but she kept track of who she used as subject content experts over a year and kept track of the demographics to be able to demonstrate, okay, am I having a comprehensive view of perspective in my reporting, in my writing. She did that quietly by herself, right? I don't know what other journalists and other media organizations are doing, but my answer to that is always just, the answer is more of everything, and broader and more inclusive, and asking yourself, taking a moment to ask the questions, what's missing, who's missing, and why.
Suzanne sent me a quick note saying that I mispronounced linguicism. It was supposed to have been, I said lingualism. So she wanted to gently chide me on that subject. But she says you answered.
We're all about learning.
learning right as we speak, in the moment. To my question, which unfortunately I felt you immediately tried to diminish, I apologize, Suzanne. Attention, respect, and positive action need to be given to Calgary's French history and heritage, going back to Rouville pre-1899 to 1907 and beyond.
Certainly wasn't my intention to diminish the question. No. But for me, I think of French language as an issue of accessibility and being able to operate and function in the language in which you choose and which you've known your life. And so for me, it's why when we do communications, you want to make sure that you actually do it in plain language so that it's easily translated, and it lacks idiomatic terms. But that's where I sit on that. I'm open to being corrected and educated and schooled on the importance of that in Canada, and particularly in Alberta.
So we're reaching towards the end of the questions. There is one question that came from Bev from Edmonton. Shared a story of her two granddaughters ordering food from Skip the Dishes. Each one ordered from a different restaurant. When the first delivery came, I wanted to know whose food it was from. So I said, where are you from? He answered, Somalia. Yeah, it's those small instances, right, Heather? It's those elements of microaggressions over time, which I'm going to pivot this into a different question, specifically on the microaggression subject. Can you delve into the concept a little bit more on microaggressions and their long-term or ongoing impact on a person?
So the example I'm going to use here is something that I just read the other day. So a young woman, not in Calgary, she lost her wallet. Wallet was found. People were amazing. Police came to her door with the wallet, everything intact. And she opened the door and saw the police and literally almost became sick to her stomach. They were there to return her lost wallet with every credit card and cash and ID in there, and tell her about the wonders and the wonderful people in her town that had brought. And because of the long-standing relationship with being policed her natural reaction was to almost be sick before she could actually get to the hello, why are you here? That's the long-term impacts of being policed as a racialized woman. That's what that feels like.
Thank you for sharing that, Heather.
Mm-hmm.
So as we have hit 12:30, I'll begin to wrap up our event today. So Heather, thank you again for joining us, sharing these stories, pulling together these various elements, and it's an awkward topic for a great many folks. It's in the discourse, which is why we're talking about it. So as the Canadian Club of Calgary thanks you, but also for those who are with us on for the event, we'll be circulating a survey where we'll be collecting responses on the various topics of, would you attend another event like this? Do you have any advice for us? And taking other feedback on speakers. So thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be collecting and reviewing your feedback and improving for our next event. So
It's an honor to be asked. Thank you so much, Vincent.
Perfect.
Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody.